All right. Thank you, Jay. Well, we're certainly looking forward to Sunday. I know several of you are. I've talked to a few of you this week, and I know you're looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to it as well. I hope that those of you that can get out and feel safe about getting out, of course, will come and be with us. Those that don't, just listen on the telephone like you've been listening, and we would appreciate that as well. And what a great encouragement that would be. If you have your Bibles with you tonight or close by, you might want to open them to Mark, the 6th chapter. Mark chapter 6. We're going to look really beginning in verse 30. We're going to look through the end of the chapter. It's not very long, but it's some 14, 15 verses. It's a great story that you're familiar with. I want to tell you, as I began our lesson this evening, I want to tell you a story. In 2004, actually, in December of 2004, there was a tsunami that hit the Asian islands just about the middle of that month, if I'm not mistaken. In 2004, right after, or 2005 actually, right after it happened, I was reading in some material and I read a story about a lady. I do not know, did not write her name down. But she was faced with a tremendous decision. It was one lady, she had two children. One was a 2-year-old and another was a 5-year-old child. And she had to make a decision that she knew as the tsunami hit the very small island upon which she lived, that she could not hold on for herself and for one child. That's all she could hold. That she could not hold to both children and thus be anchored down herself and all perish. And so she had to make this decision. Which child do I hold on to? And she agonized, as any mother would agonize over that decision. She agonized greatly over that decision and ultimately decided, don't know the reason why, but she ultimately decided to hold to the 2-year-old's hand. She did. And she and the 2-year-old were safe through the storm. And the great side of the story is that the 5-year-old child, while swept a little bit away, was found safe, and that he was all right and made it through the storm as well, virtually unscathed. I don't know about you, but when I think of that story, and every time I think of that story, I think about a lady that had problems, but she ultimately had to make a decision. Have you ever had a problem? You might say, well, preacher, that's crazy. Everybody has had a problem at one time or another. Well, let me ask you, if you've ever had a problem, what did you do? And what did you do in order to solve that problem? How did you go about solving the problem that you had? Well, you probably got some ideas, and if we were in each other's presence, we'd talk about maybe how you did it. Well, Jesus had a problem, and we want to see his problem tonight and see how he went about handling his problem. Ultimately, I think this will help us in handling our problems. We're again in Mark chapter 6, beginning in verse 30. The apostles had been sent out earlier on the limited commission. Remember, we studied it a few weeks ago, just a couple of chapters before. And they had gone to a limited area for a limited amount of time, just probably for at most a few months. We're not exactly sure. The scriptures don't tell us of the length of time that they were gone, but probably for just a few months. And they had gathered together, and they began to tell Jesus what they had done and also what they had taught. And he said to them, let's go over here into a deserted place and let's rest for a while. But there were so many people that were gathered around. People had heard about Jesus, and I'm sure word had gotten around to that the apostles were there in town. And they had done many wonderful things. And so consequently, there's a great throng of people, even though Jesus says, let's go over here to a deserted place. There's a throng of people that want to see Jesus, want to hear Jesus, and probably the apostles as well. And so Jesus says, so they departed into a deserted place. in a boat. But the multitudes came. They were literally running after Jesus. They were running after where he was going. And we don't know exactly where he ended up. Some believe that Jesus went what would amount to just a couple of miles north. He was on the Sea of Galilee, but just a couple of miles north. Some say that he went all the way across the Sea of Galilee. Now, admittedly, we are at the end of Jesus' Galilean ministry, but it would seem to be, at least in my mind, that the scholars that say, well, it was just a couple of miles just north, that makes sense. First of all, because it's deserted more in that region, I'm told. But second of all, because this throng of people are running after him, and they arrive kind of at the same time. It's almost as if they knew where he was going, even though it was a deserted place. But remember, deserted now does not mean, desert. It just simply means that there was not habitation there. In verse 34 of the text, Jesus, though, when he came out of the boat, he saw this great multitude, and he's moved with compassion. And notice the reason: because they were like sheep, not having a shepherd. In other words, Jesus gets off the boat, maybe to his surprise, maybe not to his surprise, because he could have seen these folks running along close to the shore. But nevertheless, Jesus gets off the boat and he sees these people, and they're probably milling around and they're probably talking amongst themselves, and some of them, are probably saying, man, I can't wait to hear what they got to say, and I can't wait to see what they can do. And I just want to see this Jesus that everybody's talking about, and on and on. And people are milling around talking, and Jesus sees them. They're just like that. They're sheep without a shepherd. There's nobody guiding them. There's nobody that's taking the lead and saying, hey, let's go here, let's do this, let's get organized. And so Jesus, when he sees these folks, he's moved with compassion, and he began to teach them. And he taught them, according to Mark's account. Now remember, this is also found in Matthew and John's account as well. But he begins to teach them many things. And so there are probably many different subjects with regards to the kingdom. Maybe sin, maybe salvation, maybe his impending crucifixion. We don't know what all. But he taught them many things. The day then is far spent. It's evening. It's late in the day. It's possibly beginning to get dark, if not beginning to get dark. They know that it's coming. And so there are those of the disciples that say, well, let's send them away. Let's send them to the surrounding country and villages, and so that they can go and get something to eat. In John's account, it says that Jesus once again had compassion on the folks because it was late in the day and no one probably had eaten all day long. But Jesus, when he was confronted by his own about let's send these folks away, Jesus says, wait a minute. You give them something to eat. And they never grasped hold, did they? That they were in the midst of Jesus Christ. And they said, what are we going to do? How are we going to feed these people? Now, we already know, because if you're reading ahead, you know that this is the feeding of 5,000 men. How many more did Jesus feed? Women and children. We don't know. 5,000 men. You might be 5,000 women, possibly. 5,000 children, could be. 15,000 people, maybe at a minimum. But nevertheless, they look around and they said, Lord, what are you talking about? How are we going to give these folks anything to eat? And then they asked this question, shall we go and basically go into the city, buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give them something to eat? Now think about it. That's a lot of money. that was a year's wages for the average laborer of that day. So that would have bought a tremendous amount of bread. Can we go in and buy this bread? And of course, this brings in, at least in my mind, where I'm beginning, the way I think, I'm beginning to think, not only, Lord, you're going to send us in, we've got to come up with 200 denarii, we've got to go get the bread, we've got to somehow transport it back, we've got to somehow feed these people, we're going to do all this before dark. All those logistical things come to my mind. That's the way kind of my mind works. And Jesus sent them away. And it's Andrew, we find in John's account, Andrew that searches for it through the people. And what he comes back and what he says is, we found 5 loaves and 2 fishes. 5 loaves of bread. Now think about this. A loaf of bread, as they're talking about it, would be much like what we would call a pancake. It's a flat bread, does not rise, and it's about the size of, say, a plate. We found 5 of those loaves of bread, and we found 2 fishes, and these were more likely small fish, a pickled fish that were eaten in New Testament times, much like, not completely, but much like the sardines of today. And Jesus then said, well, let's set these folks down. Let's set them down in the green grass, and let's set them down in groups. And so they sat in groups of hundreds and groups of 50s. And Jesus took the 5 loaves and 2 fishes. He looked up into the heavens. He, of course, prayed over them, prayed to God, blessed and broke the loaves, gave it to his disciples, and he set it before them and the 2 fishes, and he divided it out amongst them. They gave it to everyone. They gave it to all 5,000 men, let alone the women and children, but they give it to them. And as they're finished, everyone, we're told, each to his full, but yet there are 12 baskets of fragments. 12. It's interesting, isn't it? The way the text so often, in so few words, tells something to us that helps us describe 12 full baskets of fragments. In other words, there's not just a basket with one small fragment. Each basket was full of fragments that were left. So from 5 loaves and 2 fishes, Jesus fed a minimum of 5,000 people. That's one of those stories that has always just intrigued me. I remember studying that as a small child in Bible school and just loving the thoughts in feeding 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Always conjures up in my mind church fellowship meals, right? Well, when you think about what Jesus did, you think about how that Jesus had compassion. He had compassion over his apostles. He had compassion for the folks in order to teach them, kind of get them thinking in one direction. He had compassion for them at the end of the day when they're needing food. Jesus was a compassionate individual. But what I want us to concentrate on just for a few minutes is the fact that Jesus had a problem. He had a choice. What do I do? His problem was, how do I feed 5,000 people? Can't you see? Can't you see? I've been in homes and I've visited homes where maybe it's close to mealtime, and I try not to make that a habit, but it's close to mealtime, and all of a sudden they're wondering, oh, is he going to stay, and what are we going to feed him? That dilemma. Well, here's the dilemma of Christ. I've got a problem. Problem is, I've got folks that need to eat. There's nowhere for them to go. What are we going to do? My question is, how did Jesus handle his problem? Jesus ultimately, in handling his problem, realized that he had a problem. He realized that it was late in the day. He realized that these folks were hungry. He didn't turn a deaf eye or a deaf ear or a blind eye to the people. When we have problems, we have to ultimately understand and realize there's problems. I've seen so many folks have problems and proverbially put their head in the sand like the ostrich, thinking it will go away, only to find out that it does not go away. We have a problem. And so in realizing that there was a problem, a solution was then sought. What's the possibilities? Well, you see, that's when you've got a problem and you realize, okay, we've got a problem, the next thing you say is how we're going to solve it. Well, what are the possibilities? In our story today, Jesus could have sent the multitude away. He could have sent the apostles to go buy some bread and bring it back to them. Maybe he could have even told the crowd, go into the city, buy the bread, come back, and we'll have some more teaching. But what he did do is he sent the apostles, most notably Andrew's the one that came back with the report. And he said, here's what we've got. And so here's what happens. Jesus has a problem. He has to try to figure out a solution. And the first thing he does is he takes an inventory to see what all is had, what is needed and what is had. He knows what's needed. Why? Because he can see these folks. He can see all these folks. He finds out what is there. Now, I know that the skeptic has said that there were other people that had bread and food, that truly this one child didn't have food, be the only one to have food, and that when he brought his out, others brought theirs out. And they try to discount the miracle that way. But don't discount the miracle. It happened. Jesus took care of these people. And so Jesus had a problem. He realized his problem. He began to seek all the possibilities that he could. Now, I like the fact that in seeking the possibilities, when you think about what he did, he went and talked to the apostles. He got their input. He then sent them on a mission. And in doing that, he is gathering all the information in order to make a good and wise decision. And when what's to his mind and to his thinking was the solution of solutions. We have 5 loaves and 2 fishes. You know what Jesus probably thought? Fantastic! We have a banquet! And so Jesus says, well, set the folks down. And as he sets them down, think about what he does. He prays. And so when you've got a problem, you realize that you've got a problem, you've sought people, you've sought solutions in trying to find out all the information you can find, getting all the data, the things that you can possibly gather from others together. You then take it to the Lord. You take it to the Lord in prayer and you say, okay, Lord, you need to help me. I've got a decision. It's a huge decision. Help me make the right decision. I will tell you for a fact that when, at the first of the year, when the elders graciously offered Suzanne and I the job of coming and working with River Road Congregation, that while we had prayed long and hard before, that we would find a place that would love us and we could love and we could work hand in hand. Also, when we knew that the possibility of an offer being made, and then when an offer was made, and then later when we signed, a lot of prayers from the Daugherty household were lifted up. Asking for wisdom, asking if it's the right thing, asking God's help and God's guidance. And so Jesus then prayed as he took it to him. And ultimately, God answered. the miracle is performed. Now, I'm not saying God's going to perform a miracle in your life, because we know, according to 1 Corinthians chapter 12 and 13 and 14, miracles, as miracles were performed in New Testament times, are not performed today. Providence, yes, and God working things out, yes. But notice that that Jesus ultimately got the answer that he needed, and he provided for the people what they needed to take care of their needs, their physical needs. And not only were their needs met, but their needs were met in abundance. And so here's my point. You got a decision to make, you're going to have to make it. But as you make it, understand you've got a problem. Find all the possible answers to the problem. Take it to God, and be sure to listen for his answer. Story is told of Ronald Reagan when he was a youngster. He had an aunt that took him to a cobbler, interestingly enough, to have a pair of shoes made. He was going to have a pair of custom-made shoes. And so the cobbler went about measuring Mr. Reagan, and of course he wasn't Mr. at the time, he was a young boy, but measuring his foot and getting the contour of his foot and exactly how it was going to be made. And so finally, when he got to the end, he looked at Ronald Reagan, the cobbler did, and he said, "Do you want square toes or do you want round toes?" And Ronald Reagan could not make up his mind. And so he thought, and so finally the cobbler said, "I tell you what, go home, think about it, in a couple of days come back, tell me your answer, and I'll make you your pair of shoes." Well, several days passed, and the cobbler was walking down the street one day, and there was the child, Ronald Reagan, there in the street. And so the cobbler asked him, he said, Ronald, "Have you decided whether you wanted square toes or round toes in your shoes?" And Ronald Reagan said, I just don't know. Cobbler said, "They'll be ready tomorrow. You can come by and pick up your pair of shoes." And so when Ronald Reagan went the next day to the cobbler's place of business to get his shoes, just as the cobbler had told him, he got them. One shoe was square-toed, and the other was a rounded toe. It was there that Ronald Reagan said, "Learn to make your decisions, because if you don't, somebody will make them for you." Well, let me tell you, be wise in your decisions. Always consult the Lord and make sure that he is in the midst of your decision making. Next week, we're going to look at Jesus walking on the water, which is beginning in verse 45 of Mark chapter 6. I want you to do something for me. We'll be in person so we can have some interaction, and I look forward to that. So you have an assignment for next Wednesday night. Those of you that will be coming to the building, and if you're not going to be able to come to the building next Wednesday night, if you want to call me and give me your input on this, I'll take it to the class as well. But I want you to bring, at least in your thought, in your heart, what one verse of the Bible helps you the most when you're going through a storm in your life. What one verse gives you the most comfort, the most help when you're going through a storm. And also, part B to that assignment, not only the verse or a verse out of the Bible, but what song. Now I don't know what song you're going to pick, but we would say church song, but what song gives you the most comfort and that you sing a lot when you're going through some dark days? Dear friend, we thank you for listening tonight. We hope that you're having a great week. We hope that you have a great rest of the week. May God bless you and keep you is my prayer. Good evening.